Dobrodošli. Welcome. My name is Christina Susic Walker. I'm the current president of the Slavonian American Benevolent Society, and I'd like to welcome you to the historic Slavonian Hall. Founded in Old Town Tacoma in 1901, the Slavonian American Benevolent Society was organized by a small group of immigrants and quickly became the central social gathering place for food, dancing, singing, companionship, and storytelling. Strangers in a new country, the lodge was an essential portal into a new life. It wasn't an easy life. Struggling for a new beginning, they brought hope and skill. For the Southern Slavic population, commercial fishing was the trade brought from the old country. It meant the pioneers were often gone for several months, fishing salmon, crab, herring, and bottom fish from the Bering Sea in Alaska to the salmon banks in Puget Sound and south to the California coast. For families, the months of separation from spouses and fathers was spent developing connections with other members of the lodge. It wasn't long before the lodge found another purpose, a beacon to new immigrants, a place to feel safe, get a meal, and a place to sleep. A place where someone would know the name they carried crumpled on a piece of paper, a name of a Slav who could get them a job. Skilled fishermen, they started and perpetuated the fishing industry in the Northwest and Alaska. They established boat building and fish packing companies, became longshoremen and engineers. The talents of the Croatian people now reaches into every aspect of American trades and professions. Today, members of the Slavonian American Benevolent Society dedicate themselves to annual events that preserve and pass on family and cultural traditions. These events sustain pride in the culture and continue to build a sense of community among the Slavic people with roots in the former Yugoslavia and in Tacoma, Pierce County. Today, the Slavonian American Benevolent Society is an active organization with more than 260 adult members. We also have a junior membership as well. Now I'd like to introduce Priscilla Lisicic to you. Priscilla is a lifelong member of SOBS and the chairperson for this Croatia to America Family Heritage Panel Project.
Perfect. Hello, I'm Priscilla Lisicic, and I am a member, lifelong member of the Slavonian American Benevolent Society. I love the hall, and I love what SOB stands for. It is such a great community of people who care about their heritage, who care about the culture, who want to share everything there is to share about the food, about dancing, celebrations. So over the years, through my involvement, I've tried to help out by participating in and writing grants for different projects. And we were fortunate enough to be funded by Pierce County Historic Preservation Fund to put this panel project together. We committed that we would feature up to 6 families and do their history and create a display that we could put here in the Heritage Room here at the Slavonian Hall. So it's very exciting that we have this presentation to put in front of you that captures history from around 1890 up to the impact of families present day. All the people that you will see making presentations about their families today are all active members, are fully participating in our 260 plus membership, trying to do things to keep the traditions of the Slavonian Hall community going. So it's an honor that we were able to put this together. It's an honor to be a part of such a wonderful group of people and you will see presentations by each individual family. We couldn't do everybody in this one project. I think our dream is that we can continue to capture family histories, the stories of when people came from what was then the Austro-Hungarian Empire and left dire conditions and came to America to find a new life, and that they did. And they coalesced here as a community from first the Dalmatian Islands, and then eventually people all up and down the coast of Croatia and as far away as Zagreb. People are all welcome to be a part of this community, and we are proud of the heritage that we bring to Tacoma, to Pierce County, and to this region. And this region that goes all the way from Vancouver, Canada, down to the Portland area in Oregon. So we're proud, we're excited to share our history with you. Thank you.
He called it the old country. To us, his 26 grandchildren, the old country was a mysterious place. He told us about Old Town in Tacoma, that it was named for Stary Grad, the town where he was born. He told us he played jump frog over the bollards in the harbor on the island of Var. Our grandfather was Martin Petrich, fisherman, boat builder, visionary, and man of his word. Born Marin in 1880, his parents were Yuri Petrich and Katerina Budrovich. His brother was born, and soon after, Yuri, George, a mariner, sailed to Los Angeles. In 1888, Katerina brought her 2 sons to America. Soon, the 3rd child was born, and soon after that, she was pregnant with the 4th. George became ill, and he died, telling Martin on his deathbed that he would now be the man of the family. With little English and no family in California, Katerina waited for the birth of her 4th child, and then she traveled to Tacoma, where her Budrovich aunt, also married to a Petrich, lived. Katerina was a courageous and resourceful woman. She took in laundry. She managed a rooming house for Croatian immigrants. She led the parade the day the Sabs building opened. And she baked bread, and Martin sold it. She sent him to school, but after 1 year, he got in an argument with one of the nuns, and he left. He was 11 years old. He went to work in the shingle mills on Reston Way. He joined the Dalmatian fishermen and rowed to Point Roberts to fish. He was smart and good with his hands and good with numbers. He soon began to build houses and other buildings in Tacoma. In 1906, in Tacoma, Martin created something of a scandal when he met and married Mary Ellen Moore, an Irish girl. By 1916, father of 4 young sons, the house building business had fallen on hard times. So Martin and a friend from the island of Brach joined together to build fishing boats at the foot of Star Street. Western Boat moved to the port of Tacoma in 1921, and Petrich Shipbuilding opened by the 11th Street Bridge soon after. They were successful, building scores of fishing boats for Alaska and for the Salish Sea, PT boats during World War II, and tuna clippers that sailed the world. Western Boat also built the most famous boat in American nonfiction. The Western Flyer, owned by the Berrys from Tacoma, was chartered by John Steinbeck to go to the Gulf of Mexico, where Steinbeck then wrote his book titled The Bay of Cortez. But let's face it, boat building was not without its challenges. When the Depression hit, Western Boat shut down. There was no business. Soon, The men came to Martin and said, "You've got to help us. We're at home. We're drinking. We're being mean to our families. Do something, Martin. Find us some work." So Martin went out to his suppliers, asked that they trust him, and that they give to him the materials he needed, the wood, the nails, an engine. They made a deal. The boat builders laid the keel, and when the boat was finally sold, the men got paid, and so did his suppliers. Martin loved his new country. He drove from Tacoma to California often, and across the country to Massachusetts when the Western explorer was fishing out of Gloucester. But he loved Tacoma best. Martin ran the pool hall at Sab's. He raised money for St. Patrick's Church and for St. Joseph's Hospital. He promoted downtown. His sixth child, a daughter at last, became a nun and celebrated her 99th birthday in August of 2020 in Los Angeles. Martin never returned to the old country, but most of his sons and his daughter visited, and many of his grandchildren and great-grandchildren have fallen in love with Stary Grad and the Petriches and the Budroviches that they have met there. Today, Martin's old country has also become our country.
We're going to introduce ourselves.
Okay, my name is Mike Kajuline Barterchot Leach.
I'm Robert Mack, but my mother was Anna Mary Vlahovic, and she married what they used to call a Fereshti, so that's why I have Mack as the last name. But she was a Vlahovic.
And I too am the descendant of the Leach family, which my mother married, also a Fereshti, a Lutheran, by the way, which was very skeptical back in that.
Yeah, my mother didn't go that far. She married a Catholic.
And I was named for my grandpa Mio, which is this gentleman right here, Grandpa Mike. And Shimun came to this country before him, right around the turn of the century. Mike came to follow about 1938.
So Shimon, who became Sam because I think someone thought Simon was like Sam, so now we have Sams in the family, not Simons, came from the Casaline family, and it was tied to the Scansi family. Both families originally came from areas of Italy, and through Split, and the Scansis through the Venice area. And they ended up on the island of Broch. They lived close to each other. Sam married Elena Scansi. His brother married another Scansi, and then another part of the Scansi family came to the United States and started a shipbuilding operation in Gig Harbor, which is close to Tacoma. They induced Sam to come over. He didn't marry the boss's daughter, but he married a relative of the boss, and they induced him to come over as the manager of the Scansi shipyard in Gig Harbor, which made a lot at the turn of the century before World War II and before World War I, made a lot of fishing boats and ferries, and ran a ferry company between Tacoma and Seattle. Of his 7 children, 4 eventually came to the United States and Canada. 1 went back, Velko, the youngest. And then 3 stayed in Croatia. 2 died at the end of World War II during the war.
Shimun was called by the 2 Scansi brothers, there was a letter written back to the old country inviting him to come to Gig Harbor and bring his hull design. Prior to that, my understanding is that the Scansi shipyard sent away for their hulls at that time to build their boats at the Scansi shipyard. When Shimun came, he brought his hull design, and with the Scansi shipyard at that point was able to produce ships from beginning to end, the hull and the top, not just the top of the ship.
My grandmother was the oldest child, Katie Katatsa. She's not in this photo because she had already come to the United States and married John Vlahovic, whose house was across the street from the
Casually.
Casualine house in Sioux Martin on the island of Braj. Casualine was actually Castellini, and they put K's and Z's in it instead of C's and S's, so it looks Slavic. So when I say across the street, I don't know if you've been to the older towns in Croatia, it's about the width of a 1.5 car widths across the street. So they married each other. There's a 19-year gap between John Blavich and Katie. Mike came over. Paul's not in this picture because he was already, I think, in the army or studying abroad. He wasn't over here yet. And then the only one that carried on, the two of them carried on the shipbuilding history. His great-great-grandfather, Mike, and then Velko, who's the youngest one here, whose son, Tony, still builds boats, racing boats in Toronto, Canada. When they came here, my great-grandfather, like a lot of Croatians, had notes, and we have the notebook, instructing him what to do when he got to Tacoma on the train from New York. And he was to go to the Old Country grocery store, which is across the street from what's now the Washington State History Museum. It was run by Italians. And then they would give him instructions on where to buy goods at Montgomery Ward in downtown Tacoma and how to catch the streetcar to the ferry landing to get to Gig Harbor. He came back and forth 4 times between the United States and Croatia, which was then Austria, then became Yugoslavia. My great aunt Nicolina, who had been married to Velko, told me that every time he came back to the old country, it was to make one more child, and then he would go back to the United States. And he went back 4 times. He and a lot of our relatives found Gig Harbor similar to the Croatians found Commencement Bay and Tacoma. Except for the types of trees, it's very similar to the harbors in the old country. And Gig Harbor, well, when I first drove into Sioux Martin about 15 years ago, I was taken aback by how the harbor is very much like Gig Harbor. And they could live in a house and walk 2 or 3 blocks down to the shipyard and then walk back home, just like in the old country. So they became familiar with it. The weather was a little different. It was colder and wetter, but I think they felt comfortable in natural environment in the Northwest.
I refer to Bob as Coon Bob. He's my godfather. So previously mentioned, when my grandpa Mike came from the old country, it's a funny story that he used to tell after dinner. They came through Ellis Island, and he took the train to San Pedro, all the way across the United States. He didn't know how to speak English. So 2 things he tried. The train would stop. They would get off. They would go to a restaurant, eat, get back on the train, and continue on to California. So 2 stories from there came that were passed down through my family. One is on the island of Braj, oranges grow wild, not orange, everywhere. Late in the season, you can pick figs, oranges, all these types of fruits. So the train stopped. They got off at the restaurant. He sat at the breakfast bar somewhere in the Midwest, and he looked down the counter, and he saw somebody eating what he thought was an orange. It turned out it was a grapefruit, and he didn't know to put sugar on this grapefruit. That's what we do, here now. So he said it was the most awful thing he had ever put in his mouth to that point in his life. He never ate a grapefruit again. The next thing at those restaurants was that a word that's a crossover between English and Croatian is soup, zupa. So he ate nothing but soup all the way across the United States on his long journey from New York.
Probably all he could afford.
Probably.
So I never met my great-grandfather. He died of a sudden heart attack at my grandparents' house in Gig Harbor during a lunch break from the shipyard, and just keeled over on the steps as he went to take a nap. But he was proud, my grandmother used to tell me, he was proud of the United States very much, but he's also proud of his heritage. So the Slavonian Lodge in Tacoma, where we're filming, even though they lived in Gig Harbor, he is in this photograph. There's someone off this photograph holding the American flag, which they were proud of, but he's holding what was this Austrian-Hungary flag for Slavonia. and it was from the old country. And he was proud of his heritage, but he's also very proud of being an American. His descendants are all over the world, and his relatives are all over the world. Some in Australia, some in Chile, some in Canada, obviously, and then here in the United States. So the family has been connected with the Scansies, and because of that, they've sort of both families have handed down a boat building tradition, of which I never partook because I'm not that skilled.
And when I was growing up, there was a decision to make between my mom and my dad. My dad worked with metal. He was very good with his hands. He is very good with his hands. My mom's family, obviously the Casualine family, were woodworkers. So in my adult life, I've come to work with wood to carry on the tradition of my family. Not quite boats. Grandpa closed down the shipyard in 1969, so I didn't get to learn that skill. I would have loved to learn that. But the Casualine Coal Shipyard closed in 1969. That's the year I was born, and I unfortunately didn't get to learn how to build boats, but I carry on the woodworking tradition through hardwood floors and working with beautiful oaks and pines and fir, things like that.
And I would just add one more thing I thought of because of the photograph here. He was very devoted to his Catholic faith, and he did two things with his hands. One is he helped build the altar at St. Nicholas Church in Gig Harbor. The church has been preserved. The altar was disassembled and sent somewhere else to a mission church years ago, I believe. I don't think it still exists there. And he helped construct the altar in his hometown of Sault Martin at the church there, which was built at about the same time St. Nicholas was. So he, in going back and forth and doing his shipbuilding, he also had time to work on the side altars and the altars in those two churches, of which he was very proud. I think that sums it up.
Yeah, there's a lot of history there between the Casualine and Barkots and Vlahoviches. It kind of only scratches the surface. Not to mention the Barkot family being longtime restaurant owners, California Oyster House,
Right.
Harbor Lights, Barkot Seafood, Mama Lemoyne's here in Tacoma, to name a few.
So you're fortunate that we don't have other relatives here to rebut what we said or to question it. But if they were here, they'd all say, I think they're very proud of their ancestry from Sam and from my grandmother Katie, who married into the Vlahoviches family, who are also from Sault Martin.
Shout out to our family all over the world, especially in Vancouver. During this time right now in 2020, we miss you. We can't come and visit right now, but we love you, and we can't wait to reunite very soon.
Hello, my name is Joe Lisicich, and
I'm Priscilla Lisicich, Joe's sister.
our grandparents were Vinca and Visco Lisicich. Visco came to this country in 1906 and commissioned that 3 fishing boats be built for him, not all at the same time. He chose Tacoma because there was already an established Slavic community here and fishing was great.
Grandpa Visco came from a village, Grohote, on the island of Sholta. And of course, people were wanting to come to America at the time because conditions in what was then the Austro-Hungarian Empire were really, really bad. The economy was bad. Being ruled by the Habsburgs was not beneficial to their community. So he came bringing his fishing trade with him. And he was here for a few years, and then my grandmother, Vinca Budrovich, was from the town of Starigrad. And at the time, the men here were wanting to get married, start families, so women from villages in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Dalmatian Islands were hopefully wanting to come over and to find a better life here in America. So Grandma Vinka was a picture bride. So her picture was presented to Visco by Mrs. Berry, who helped to broker that marriage. And so they were married in 1914, and she actually came over in 1913. And a really cool thing that we still have in our family is a letter written by Lucia Pakasic, who was the wife of Angelo Pakasic. And Grandma came with the Pakasics on a passport where they brought 13 women at the time to meet the men here in Tacoma, and they arrived in Old Tacoma. A fun story is that in Starigrad, if you've been there, the streets are wonderfully paved, and it was a big shock for people when they got here to find that we didn't have paved streets. We had muddy streets and a lot of rain. So it was a really different lifestyle, but they loved it here.
The women stayed with Mrs. Suslich, who was the mother of George Suslich. She ran a boarding house, and the rules were very strict. They had to be in by a certain time, and the men were not allowed up into the rooms or anything like that. So it was, there's a connection there between our family and the Susliches.
Yes, right.
Shortly after Visco got here to the United States, he built his first fishing boat. He commissioned Martinac Shipbuilding to build the Planet. And he continued to run that boat until after he got married to Vinka. And after he got married, he sold the Planet and built another boat named the Sholta in honor of the island that he came from. They were married January 14th, 1914. And shortly, a year later, they had their first child, which was my uncle, our uncle, Anton Lisicic. And then there was Helen Lisicic. She was born in 1917, and my dad, our dad, was born in 1919.
Right. So a fun story is Vinka came from Starigrad, as I said. Her parents, Anton and Mira, were winemakers. So Vinka was quite the winemaker. She used to make wine every year. And Joe,
And
tell your
Vince,
story.
and Vince, we would go down every spring and mash the grapes. And she would wash the boots to make sure that they were clean. We'd put the boots on, we'd mash the grapes, we'd take and dump the grapes into oak barrels, wine barrels. And she had about, I think, 4 of them, if I remember correctly. And it was a process. I don't know how she controlled the bacteria, because she didn't use what they use in commercial winemaking to control bacteria. She just knew how to do it, and her wine was very good. It was always good. I can remember growing up, we always had wine on the table, and every once in a while I would try it. I didn't like it, but I would try it. And
Yeah. The other neat thing is in the family, the 3 families were really connected, and every Friday, well, first of all, we lost, and I never did meet, neither Joe nor I met Visco Grandpa Visco because he died in 1935. Yeah.
35.
35. And it was at that time then that my father, who was around 14 years old, was right around then, he had been fishing with the Swedes. He was then sent to, he was kind of like the breadwinner of the family. And eventually he became skipper of the final boat that Grandpa had built by Martin Petrich, Petrich Boat Building, which was named after Auntie Helen or the Helen L. So my dad ran the Helen L for years. And so he, you can see here was the Helen L built by Petrich Boat Builders. That was the last boat that they had. And every Friday, Grandma, so it was like a real community support system, the three families. And every Friday, we would get fresh made bublitsa. So you'd get this big bowl, pan of bublitsa, which was like the best bread ever. And then also a casserole of zea, which could be different greens or spinach or broccoli or with potatoes or whatever. So that was always something that, you know, we had every Friday. And so then something else, when my father married Dorothy, who was Ukrainian descent, so not Slavic, but Ukrainian. And she became quite a positive member of the Slavonian Hall. And I can remember growing up here, coming to all the different events at the hall. It was really fun, all the dances, everything. And she was really dedicated to supporting and being a really integral part of making the hall a big success. So she actually initiated, along with a couple of other members, Milka Bakoka and Fran Pasnick and Eva Suslich. They put together a pastry sale. So then featuring the different wonderful Croatian pastries that people make. So that tradition was started kind of by a Foresti with the other Croatian ladies in the lodge. And it's a really, just kind of a fun little side story on that.
She also was involved, they used to do rummage sales here, and they'd fill both sides of the hall with rummage, and it was always a big seller.
Yeah.
It was always a big event.
A big fundraiser.
And the women started the daffodil dinner and selling the pastries at the daffodil dinners. I can't remember all of the things that.
Well, they did a lot.
They did a
lot to
the style show.
Make sure that the hall stayed strong, as Christina expressed in the beginning, that the membership is very involved. And so I know as a individual who is a member, I'm very committed, but it is because of this tradition that we have from our grandparents who came here so long ago.
As an aside, the family, the Lisicic-Kokic family, has always been very involved in this hall. Dorothy was president for a while, as was Vince Kokic, my cousin. I was vice president and president of this lodge. Mary Borer, Vince Kokic's daughter, was on the board. We were always involved in the hall to make this hall a better place.
Okay, my name is Fred Mullen. I'm the grandson of Nick and Helen Mullen. And actually the name isn't Mullen, it's Mulan. But that's one of those glitches that came about when they came through the immigration. And my grandfather came here in 1899 at age 17, and my grandmother came here it was 1907 at the age of 14. And they ended up in Old Town, which my grandmother, I guess, was sick the whole boat trip across. And that must have been heck for the length of the trip if you've ever been seasick. And when she got here, like most people will tell you, the streets weren't paved with stones like Stalingrad, where on the island of War, where they came from. The sidewalks were wood and the streets were mud. And the sidewalks, I would assume, got full of mud when it was raining. So when they got here, my grandmother worked in one of the boarding houses, and she cooked, washed clothes, and I guess assisted with some childbirths at the age of 15. My grandfather started fishing like most gentlemen did, and one of the things that most people from Croatia, when they got here, they'd either learned it over there or they learned it here. They got into fishing. And one thing here is you could go, if you didn't like it here, you might go to Bellingham or Everett, go across the Vashon Island, Gig Harbor. You might end up down in Aberdeen, Astoria, or California. So there was a lot of places they could go and they could fish. And then a lot of them learned boat building or woodwork in the old country. So when they came here, it fit right in, because in the off seasons from fishing, they could go and work in the shipyards, which there are quite a few around. In fact, at Dockton, Martinovich's had a yard which I think they built the last three-masted sailing schooner. So there's a lot of top-notch shipyards around here. And when first the fishing here, they didn't go very far. It was mostly just in here, and then they progressed up to the San Juans and slowly out to Kodiak, Sandpoint, Falls Pass, and that, and then the gillnet boats got in Bristol Bay. So most everybody that was down here in Old Town, the Croatian part of Old Town, were in the fishing business or in the boat building business. And that went on for eons until the later date that sort of subsided. So some of the, according to my dad, a lot of the guys that went down to California to fish sardines, they'd made a lot of money, and some of them decided to stay there. And that's how people moved around, because there's people in mining and in coal that didn't get in fishing. Some didn't like it. But for most people in this part here, Old Town, that's what most everybody did. One thing about Old Town, it was sort of like being the old country. It was a tight-knit group of people. They didn't always get together, but most of the time they did. And everybody practically had a small garden in the backyard, and a lot of the men made wine. But the thing here is there were no vineyards here. You had to order your grapes from a dealer, and then he'd bring it in for you. And fishing progressed, probably, I would say, not being there, fairly fast all over. And boats got bigger so they could go further away. And when that was over, they went from that to dragging, so that they were able to make money during the whole year and not have to work in the shipyards. But most fishermen work in the shipyards. Petriches, they were probably the best, according to my dad, of not saying much when in the summertime you came and said, yeah, well, I gotta go fishing now. But there was one yard in the town that they frowned on it. They didn't like guys taking off for fishing. But according to the guys, that's too bad, that's my money. So anyway, there was a lot of yards here, and then as fishing slowed down worldwide, then a lot of the smaller yards here went out of business. And the last, we'll call it medium-sized yard to go out of business was Martinac's. Now we have nothing here in that way. But fishing is a good life. You're away from your family sometimes for long times, but that's one of those things. And like I say, the guys that fished here before, they were gone because they might fish here, then go up to Alaska, and they might do sardines down in California. But it was neat. I guess you'd have to be my age. I'm the oldest one in my family, and probably one of the oldest in Old Town that was here before. To see the way it was then and compare what my dad and mother would tell me it was like, and seeing myself back then, and you could go back 10, 15 years and figure out it was the same thing as when I was a little kid. I spent more time down here, well, not more, but a big part of the time down here because I had my mother's parents lived down Old Town too. And just visit all, it was like one big family. Everybody knew everybody else. In fact, I'm so stuck on Old Town. The little house I live in is 80 feet from the house that my mother, her two sisters, and her mother and stepfather were moved to when they came from Aberdeen, because my mother was born in Aberdeen. I'm 80 feet from the house that I was born in, and I'm 1.5 blocks from the house where my father and his brothers and sisters were born in. And I haven't been a lot of places in the world. I've been a lot of different states, but there's no place that I want to be than here. That's all I have. Thank you.
Hello there. Hi, my name is Kathy Ursich, and I'm a direct descendant of Joseph Ursich of Old Town. I'm his granddaughter, and my grandpa came over at the turn of the century, and he came over with his two cousins, George and Pete Ursich, and their friend Vladimir Sorovich. So, but anyway, he comes over with his cousins and friend, and they stay at this boarding house that was on 31st Street in Old Town, and you go down the corner, but it's not there anymore. And then, he was a boarder, and my grandma came over with her aunt, and she cooked in the kitchen and changed sheets, and then he was there, with his buddies, and then he obviously asked her out, and they got married right here in Old Town in front of that boarding house. But there they are in 1908. And then so he had 2 children, my father, Kreshimir Ursich, and my aunt, Perina Ursich. And so anyway, there is my ancestors. And so they got married. And so I grew up with my parents. My mother was Croatian. My dad met my mother in San Pedro because she was stationed in the Navy, and off San Pedro is where our Croatians live in California. And there's fishing off the docks there. Anyway, so on my mother's side, I'm Croatian. My grandpa Rocco, he was Croatian. And my grandpa on my mother's side, he actually jumped ship. He was picking grapes in his uncle's vineyard, and he said, I want to go to America. And so at 16, he jumped on the ship and went to New Orleans where his cousin was. So on that side, I'm Croatian, but a different part of Croatia. They're more inland, from Zagrada and Dubrovka. So anyway, I'm full of blood on both sides. I grew up hearing the language with my grandma and everybody speaking the language. Well, my grandpa was a former past president of the lodge. And my grandpa I remember about 10 years ago, I was at one of our lodge events, and an old timer came up to me. He must have been 80 or 85, and he said, "Your grandfather had the biggest funeral cortege I have ever seen." In the old days, the St. Patrick's Church, the Croatians were all Catholic, was down there on the Carver in a little house. So all the Croatians come over, and they had all these Catholics, and they were almost responsible for the building of St. Patrick's Church up there, and it was up the hill, it was actually built in 1908 because they all went to Mass and they were Catholic. So they actually were responsible for that church being built. So anyway, they were all Catholic, and the bottom line, they would have these funeral receptions. So when my grandpa died, they would have the funeral mass, and then they would come down to the lodge for a big buffet of food, and usually that included alcohol, the hard stuff, and they'd have a really good, and then they would leave from here with the hearse, and they'd follow all the way to the cemetery. And I have my grandpa Ursich's funeral book, and I was counting the amount of floral displays. He had almost 100 floral bouquets, and I don't know where they put those on the altar, because he was beloved. And one of the reasons he was beloved, they actually had a little meat shop and down there in Old Town, and it's actually a parking lot. And him and his two cousins, they sold meat, and that you had to cut meat. There's no packaging, wrap it in white paper. And I'm sure my grandpa, being the way he was, would let people buy things on credit. "Oh, you don't have any money now, but you can pay me later for that ham," because he just was such a generous person. And so he had this kind of thing going on. And then my cousin told me that he sang at wedding receptions and funerals. He had a really kind of like Pavarotti chest, so he could really sing. So he probably sang at all the funerals, the wedding receptions, and was very generous and helped all these people. So his funeral cortege was huge. Well, another thing is the pastries my grandma would make. She would make rastella, which is these kind of and Easter bread. They're really labor intensive. You have to get the dough and let it rise. Then you get it out and you roll it out. Then you have to crimp the rastella and fry it up in a pan. And anytime in the lodge daffodil dinner, they would come in and the senior woman would make it, and I would buy almost every single box because I love it. I tried to make it on my own one time, but I burned it, so I never made it again. My frying skills were not. So when I was growing up, I was aware of people baking these old pastries straight from Croatia, and we do have some good cookbooks on that and how to do that. I'm so glad our lodge made the cookbooks. My dad, when I was a kid, went commercial fishing in Alaska. And every summer, my father would go up to Everett with I think it was in Rinkovich's, and we would drive up to Everett, and we go down to the waterfront on the boat. And it was very hard on me as a child because my father we'd wave goodbye to him from the end of the dock. Mm-hmm. And he would be at the end of the fishing boat till it went around the bend. Mm-hmm. And I always worried I would never see him again because in Alaska, you're way out there, the boat can overturn, and some days they would have a really big catch. And we don't want to talk about the salmon in the Columbia River either. There was fishing out of Astoria. And then Washington State, back in the early 70s, dammed all the rivers, and the salmon could not go upstream to spawn. The female would go up and lay her eggs, and the male would go up and fertilize. So then you would have all these salmon swimming down into the Columbia and going out where Astoria is, and there was a lot of fishery there, and my dad did that in the 50s. And they had a lot of canneries there. At their Maritime Museum, you're going to see a whole wall of labels from their canneries. And there's one movie I really like, it's Cannery Row, that one with in the 50s where they actually, it was filmed in Monterey because they had a lot of fishing out of Monterey there. So anyway, the fish are gone. And then the Native Americans came along in around 71 and said, well, we own the rights to the land under the rivers. So the commercial fishing died off and then my dad, after he was done with Alaska, he actually went fishing with the Babbages out of Big Harbor. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Anyway, so that was better because this was sound fishing, and I think it was done in the fall, and they have the old, David Loverovich and I. What's really interesting, his father and my father fished with the Babbages, and he was working on the next shed, David Loverovich. So when I see him, we always talk about the fishing and stuff. We have that in common, that his father Dominic and my father Kreshner, they actually fished on the same boats at one time. Isn't that neat? And so they would go sound fishing, and they would go up in the islands, like Friday Harbor and all these, and then that was when they were allowed to fish. And actually, when you go up to Friday Harbor, I took a boat trip up years ago. They have, what are those fish that jump in the water there? Not the seals, the orcas. And in about 94, I went with a friend on a boat trip, and the orcas were just jumping in the water alongside us. And I think they're having trouble surviving too. But as for the sound fishing, I don't know much about how that is doing out of Gig Harbor. They do have the historical net shed though, that's on where they used to have to, before polyester, they had to take the nets, and the nets were this kind of woven out of string, and they had to mend the nets, and I still have the thing that they would mend the nets on, and now I think the nets are all polyester, but that was back in the 50s. And so I have a lot of memories of the commercial fishing done in and around the Sound, and of course the lovely orcas. And yeah, we're a lot of fishing. There used to be a lot of fishing.
Right. Yeah. So, you've heard stories, and in conclusion, I have a special story I would like to share with you about our the first president of the Slavonian American Benevolent Society, Mr. Andrew Guyich. He was quite a leader in our community and in the Slavonian community, but also he was quite a leader in the Old Town community and looked at by city leaders as being very, very key to helping the community, the city run well and do our part here in Old Town. So Mr. Guyich was the person in charge when in 1905 a group of the founding members decided that they wanted to actually build a hall, because the Slavonian American Benevolent Society was founded in 1901 as an organization, and people gathered, and but they didn't actually have a place. So they were really forward-thinking and decided they wanted to build a hall, and they were able to borrow $3,000, which is like amazing to think about it back then, $3,000 to build this wonderful building. So this is the original building, and it is always noted that the members worked hard to repay Mr. Baratich, who they borrowed the money from, Andrew Baratich, the $3,000. And here you have a check that was made out to Mr. Baratich for the repayment of the $3,000. It says on the note to be given anyway. So that was really great. Mr. Guyich came from the island of Brach, and he never did go fishing. He was one of the people who was kind of like be the anchor back here in this community. He did some really wonderful things, including during World War I, when people were being asked to help fight the World War I, he was employed at Camp Base Lewis, which is now Joint Base Lewis McChord, but he would help to vet people out and to review their records and see if they were qualified to be a soldier. And also, the other great thing that I think is a fun story is a group of people wanted to become, wanted to do acting performances. So the Slavonian Hall folks were really excited to have parties and big dinners and dancing and picnics. Picnics were really, really big back then. But there were also people interested in acting. So he had the hall serve as the first place for what was called the Old Town Theater. And Old Town Theater became kind of the place to put on your acting skills. And I know that my grandfather, Visco, actually performed in many plays because I heard about those, and that was really fun. So Mr. Gujic was at every play, and eventually the Old Town Theater became what is now the Tacoma Little Theater, and they just recently celebrated their 100 years as the Tacoma Little Theater. So in so many ways, the Slavonian community and that where people came from what is now Croatia and had been Croatia way before as well. There's a lot of pride, and Mr. Gujic was a fantastic leader as our first president of the Slavonian American Benevolent Society. Thank you for joining us today. This has really been fun, and I hope that you have picked up little pieces of history or found something interesting in each family presentation. Thank you.